Well, hey, Mike, thank you so much for setting time aside to have this conversation with you as a guy. I got to be honest with you. Your comments when you were speaking to Japan and the translator said that vulnerability isn't bad, it's just hard. I
Yeah.
have to admit with you, having this conversation and getting and diving into authenticity and vulnerability as a guy, such an important conversation, but it's certainly not an easy one and an easy topic to dive into. So thank you so much for the courage you've brought into the world, the content you're creating in the world, and helping people understand how important it is to make the biggest impact we can. We have to be our authentic self. So thank you, Mike, for the resources that you're creating. I know they're making a difference.
Well, listen, I appreciate the kind words. I appreciate you inviting me onto the show so we can talk about these things. And one of the things about that specifically for me, and you can probably relate to this as a man, I'm sure most of the men who are listening to us, I grew up and was taught, like most of us were taught, like, suck it up, be a man, boys don't cry, all of those things that I think we've gotten a little bit better in how we raise our boys today than maybe when some of us were growing up, although quite frankly, not that much better. And there's this notion that we have that somehow being real and showing our real emotions and, is weak, is bad, and we shouldn't do it. There's a whole set of challenges that women face on this front that are a little bit different, but similarly, if not more challenging in some ways. But as a kid growing up, Kyle, I was always this really sensitive kid. I cried easily. I felt things deeply, but I looked around and most of the other kids, particularly the boys that I was around, like didn't act that way, didn't operate that way. We weren't encouraged to do that. And so I spent a lot of my young life thinking something was wrong with me or that I was really weird or that I had to cover it up. And it just didn't serve me. And I don't think it serves us. And so a big part of my passion behind my work, even 20 years into doing it, is just self-serving in that, like, I don't want to have to walk around hiding all the time and pretending like I'm tough and I'm strong and I got it together, because I don't. And I don't think most of us do. And I think once we start to tell the truth about it, not only does it liberate us, but it gives other people permission to do the same. And that has so many benefits for us.
I couldn't agree more. I'm recovering in this area for sure of my life. I've got a lot of stories where vulnerability and having vulnerability with my wife specifically has created these tremendous moments of connection for us as a couple. And what I misunderstood is being strong and resilient and giving that gift to her was actually a tremendous detriment in our relationship and was making her feel alone and isolated. And so one of the things I'm curious to know is what has your research specifically taught you, or your lived experience for that matter, taught you about the need for vulnerability to create an authentic connection? Is that a necessity, or can I, is me playing like macho man, is that working for most men out there? Or am I just like, if a guy's out there playing that role, feels like he's still got to be on that white horse, is he going down the wrong path in terms of creating real quality connection with the people he loves and cares about?
Well, look, I think one of the ways, it's a great question, and it's an important one. I think if we think about all the relationships in our lives, whether it's a love relationship like with your wife or with my wife, or whether it's a family relationship with a sibling or a parent or a cousin, or whether it's a friendship or even a work relationship, I often ask people, think about the closest relationships you have in your life currently or you've had in your life in the past. Why were those relationships so close? Like, why did you feel connected to that other? And there's a lot of different reasons, right? Oh, I like them, or we share certain values, or we have similar interests, or but at some level, what it comes down to, regardless of whether it's, our intimate partner or a manager that we really admire, or a teacher that we had in school, or a teammate in a sport, or a coworker, or a friend, it comes down to this sense of like, we can trust that person and we feel safe with that person. I can be myself, and I know this person is still going to accept me, and they can be themselves, right? So from that standpoint, when we first meet someone, whether it's in a business setting, you're talking to a prospective client, or even in a personal setting, my wife and I've been together for 20 years, so I haven't been on a first date in a long time, but I remember that experience. It's like when I took my wife out for the first time, like, I was trying to impress her. I wanted her to like me. But you know what's interesting? My wife, Michelle, taught me something really important early on in our relationship. We'd been dating for, I don't know, probably a month and a half or so. And it was going well. We really liked each other and we were spending a lot of time together. And Michelle sat me down one night. We were having dinner and she's like, look, we've been dating for a while. It's going well. I like you, but I think it's time that we really like share some stuff with each other.
Oh.
Like she said, here's some things that I don't want you to know about me. And she just shared a whole bunch of stuff. And I was like, at first a little like, whoa. But then I was like, wow, I love this. And I did the same thing. And we started just to really open up. And that for me, I didn't know if I was going to spend the rest of my life with this woman or not. We were just newly dating. But what it did was just create a deeper level of trust and connection. And I think, again, we can do some version of that in most of our relationships. And yeah, is it a little scary? And might someone laugh at us or judge us or use it against us or think we're weird? Sure. But ultimately, when we get to that place of real deep trust and connection, that's usually what it is. Hey, you know a bunch of things about me and you like me anyway. And I know a bunch of things about you and I like you anyway. And we make an agreement with each other. We're not going to use those things against each other. We're actually going to know that that means we're really close and we really do care about one another.
Yeah, I don't know who initiated that kind of conversation with my wife and I, but certainly I wanted, I'm a flawed human being. I mean, I've made some, I made some flaming like mistakes, there's some scorch marks, there's some scorched earth. And I wanted her to hear those things from me, right? Totally. We live in small communities and small areas and people are connected. I wanted her to know that, hey, look, like you're dating somebody who's got some mistakes along the way. And I've learned from them. Like, here's the lessons I learned from those experiences. And I think so what's so often is that I see, right, that I observe, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, is I see what happens so often is we're in this protection mode that I'm perfect, right, feeling we need to be unblemished, is that we lose the transfer of a lot of wisdom because our best wisdom comes in those, as Dr. Brene Brown references them, those face down in the arena moments. Like,
totally.
What do you see in terms of wisdom, collaboration, and knowledge sharing? Where does the inability to be vulnerable interfere with that transfer of wisdom and knowledge in the human experience?
Well, if you think about it, and referencing Dr. Brene Brown and her great work and all her research on vulnerability, I mean, she talks about, I love her definition of vulnerability. She says vulnerability is risk, emotional exposure, and uncertainty. And if you think about those three things, risk, some of us are more risk averse than others. I mean, you do ultra marathons and extreme sports things that not all of us, myself included, are necessarily excited to go do. Some people, you work in the financial world. Some people are more risk averse. When you're working with a client, you want to figure out their risk tolerancy in terms of investing their money. In businesses, some people get jobs working in very stable situations. I'm going to go work for the government or for a utility. I mean, there's not a ton of things that aren't that don't involve a certain amount of risk in today's world. But hey, if you're going to go work for, a technology startup or some, new thing, maybe, but in terms of risk and uncertainty, most of us, those things are uncomfortable. Those things are a little scary for some of us more than others, but ultimately it's important to embrace them. And then emotional exposure is more on a relational basis, like you and your wife, me and my wife, those conversations, things that we're willing to, disclose or share with other people. But in reality, ultimately, most of us have been trained, whether we're male or female, to not do those things or to protect ourselves from those things. Because on a physical level, that makes sense, right? I mean, think about even during the pandemic, it's like, oh, we need to stay home. We need to wear a mask. We need to stay away from people. Even in a non-pandemic time, it's like you put on a seatbelt, you get life insurance. You look both ways before you cross the street. I mean, you do things to physically try to protect against the inevitable vulnerability of being human.
Yes.
But it's really on an emotional level, on a relational level, and even on a sort of, business and creative level. If we're not willing to embrace vulnerability, we really can't change. We can't innovate. We can't, there's no, as Brene Brown likes to say, there's no courage without vulnerability. Like anything in life that we do that requires courage on our part, again, from asking someone on a date to starting a new business, to asking for the business, to, writing a blog post and putting it out into the world, to literally almost anything, it takes a certain amount of risk. We have to get in that arena and know that, you know what, this could go great, but it could also go really badly. And, you know, you start an ultra marathon. I've never done one, so I wouldn't know, but I imagine there's a decent chance you're not going to make it to the end, or you might make it, but you might not win, or you might not do your best time, or you might hurt your body in the process. And so there's certain risk involved.
Yes, there's the 100%. 100%.
But the reward, I would imagine, from doing it, again, having never done it, is such that I'm willing to put that at risk because I want the benefit or the outcome, or at least the feeling of satisfaction of trying something hard and being able to complete it and challenge myself.
Well, here's what it's an interesting correlation. I think there's a really strong correlation between intentional physical suffering and the opportunity to learn how to. It is like I've got a surgery coming up in 10 days. I literally ran a 50-mile ultra marathon with a partially tore plantar fascia. So yeah. But if you ask me to stand up and be super vulnerable in front of a group of people, I'd rather run the 50 miles. I've got to be honest with you. I really would. It's a very frightening thing for me to do. There's a lot of reasoning behind that as a guy and as a daddy to a little boy. My son shared with me the other day. He told me he was scared.
Yeah.
And I shared with him. I looked at him and he's 6 years old. I said, I want to share with you. That was one of the bravest moments you've ever had. Right? I'm proud of you for letting me know how you feel.
Yeah.
Right? And I really looked. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, and I get goosebumps hearing you say that. So I have two daughters who are 15 and 12, and it's, you know, as you know, parenthood, fatherhood is such a vulnerable experience.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But I think for what it's worth, and I'm not raising a boy. I do realize and appreciate the role that I play as the father to my two daughters. But I think as a son, as a boy, you know, being raised by a father who's not only willing to acknowledge him when he admits that he's scared, but also can model that and show him. And I purposefully, even with my girls, I purposefully will share with them, not inappropriately. I mean, they're still, you know, they're at different ages, and your son's 6. So we want to be mindful of the sort of age appropriateness of the things we share with our kids, right?
Yes.
You know, my girls, when they were little, especially, didn't need to know that my wife and I were really stressed out financially when we were. Like, that's too much for them.
We're not sure if we could afford groceries. Just want to let you know here at dinner.
Exactly.
Enjoy the meal.
That's the difference, by the way, between, you know, people mistake vulnerability with transparency in the sense that being transparent and sharing everything with everyone all the time is not only not vulnerability, that's actually not appropriate, and it can be really damaging. You know, again, if you were going through problems with your wife and you sat your 6-year-old son down and said, hey, buddy, mom and I are having a really tough time. We're not sure if we're going to stay married. Like, that's maybe real and honest. And maybe you'd share that with me as your best friend or your therapist, or, you know, but not with your 6-year-old son. You know what I mean? But that said, I think it's really important that our kids do see us when we're challenged by things, and that we talk about things in a way like my girls. I'm very specific, and especially now that they're 15 and 12 and, you know, high school and middle school, to talk to them about some of the challenges that I experience even now, not to freak them out, but just to let them know, hey, you know what? I was really scared the other day when I had to do this, and I wasn't sure how it was going to go. And it actually went well, or it didn't go so well, or this happened, or I'm really disappointed that I tried really hard for this and I failed, or I heard no. Because I think sometimes, you know, they see me prior to the pandemic, you know, leave and go to the airport and fly off to go speak somewhere. Or now they see me sitting here in my office and they know what I do. Yes. And they see the books and the stuff, but they just think sort of dad just woke up one day and decided to write some books. And, you know, but the other day, my ninth grader, Samantha, had an assignment in one of her classes to talk about failure and rejection.
Oh, love it.
And and it was about her, but also about, do you have an example of someone you know who's really failed? And she texted me because she was up in her room, Dad, can you come up here? And I go upstairs and she's like, Dad, tell me the story about how your first book got published. And I was like, well, honey, yeah, it took 5 years. I got rejected by 25 publishers and I quit a bunch of times. And then, you know, what happened was you were born. And then it really lit a fire under my butt. And I'm like, I'm publishing this book, whether a publisher wants to publish it or I have to publish it myself. And I told my agent, I'm ready. I'm going to go publish this myself. And she said, hold on a second. There's a couple more publishers that I'm going to reach out to. We'll see. And literally, Kyle, a week later, my agent called me back and she's like, you're not going to believe this, Mike. All 3 of the publishers are interested. And nothing about my book proposal had changed, but something in me had changed. And I was
Yes.
ready to write the book. I mean,
Yes.
this was back in 2006, but it was 3 weeks after Samantha, who's now 15, was born. And I told Samantha this story, and she wrote it in her paper for school. I said, honey, there was something in me that was like, I'm a father now. I've been working on this for 5 years. I'm ready to do this. So my mindset shifted, and that helped shift. But I went through a lot of pain, a lot of struggle, a lot of challenge, and I wanted to quit. And so, now 5 books later, if I hadn't gotten that first book published, none of the other ones would have gotten published.
None of it comes. And there's so much in that. We could spend a half hour on that moment alone. And so much of this, like, I think so often we wonder when our life's going to take off. When are we going to make this change? When are we going to make this impact? And for you, like it is for almost everyone else, is when you decided it was going to. When there was no other path forward other than to create what you felt destined to create in your life. And what a gift. And the willingness to say to your daughter, like, hey, look, like what you see today. So one of the primary reasons that I ran the Ultra is I wanted to let my kids see me suffer.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds insane, but you don't just wake up on a Tuesday and run an ultra marathon. You don't do that. I mean, you can. People have done that. You usually end up, the only person I know who did that, like their next trip was directly to the hospital. So you have to prepare the body physiologically to move for that length of time. No matter how fast you're going, you have to physiologically get ready. And which means my kids were going to see me get up and they were going to see me suffer. They're going to see me go through the process that getting the body ready. And so what often happens, I think, and this is what you're touching on as parents, is that our kids show up at a certain phase, a certain stage of our life. They show up in chapter 7, chapter 12 of a 30-page book, right? And the first 6 chapters were ugly. They were messy. There were all the suffering and all the failures. And I think one of the greatest gifts we can do is it's one of two things. It's either continue to put ourselves at risk in vulnerability and transparency and discomfort and let our kids and talk about it openly in an age-appropriate way, or to be willing to talk about the gift of failure in front of our kids. So I could tell you're a fan of what I'm saying already. So talk to me about how that's evolved, that understanding's evolved for you.
Well, and I think it relates obviously to parenting, but it also relates to leadership and to life. And from the standpoint, I remember talking to a woman named Cindy Elkins, who she's an executive at Genentech. When I interviewed her, this was for a previous book that I wrote called Bring Your Whole Self to Work. And she was talking about, things that good leaders do is like your team has development plans and what are you working on and where are you growing? And she said, she'd always been a real advocate. And then she realized at one point, this was a few years back, oh, I don't have a development plan, or I'm not real, or either I don't have it, or it's not that bold, or I'm not sharing it with my team. And she's like, but I had some stuff going on in the background that I was working on. I was working with a mentor. She at the time really wanted to get onto a board of a big company. And she was saying she was finding it challenging. And as a woman, she was getting a lot of rejection, and it was vulnerable and it was kind of scary. And she wasn't sure if it was going to happen. And she's like, so I decided to actually share it with my team. Hey, this is something that I'm working on. This is something I've been struggling with. This is something that hasn't been going the way I want it to go. But because I'm talking to all of you all the time about your own development plans, and I talk to my own manager and my mentor, but I want to talk to you and just let you know. And she said what was amazing was her team got really excited and was very supportive. And within about 6 months, she actually got invited to be on this board that she really wanted to be on. And it was a celebratory moment. But I share that in the context of when I'm working with leaders, especially really senior leaders inside of some of these big corporations that we partner with. It's tricky because in order to get to those levels in life, it does take a lot of skill, a lot of grit, a lot of tenacity. You got to learn how to sort of work the system, if you will. And part of in life, anywhere we get, whether it's high up in the corporate world, whether it's success in athletics or business or finance or anything, there's a tendency when we get to a certain status level to protect it. I mean, again, think about it in from a wealth management perspective, right? You don't want to do stupid things with all this wealth that you've built over the years, especially if you're getting older. Like, you want to be smart about it. You want to protect it. You want to protect some of the downside of it. Again, that makes sense, practically speaking, and you're more of an expert in this clearly than I am. But on a human level, while it's counterintuitive, if we're not continually willing to risk, willing to open up, then we're just sitting in our proverbial ivory tower, and we can't actually have the kind of impact that we really want to have, or telling the stories, whether it's to our kids or, oh, when I was your age, or what. Like, I see this now raising a tween and a teen. That doesn't go well. They roll their eyes the moment I say, but if I can really relate to them, both sharing what's going on for me now vulnerably, or maybe sharing a story back from my life when I was their age, but doing it from my heart and in a genuine way, not to, oh, I remember what it was like to be a freshman in high school, kind of, because the truth is, I have no idea what it's like to be a freshman in high school right now, during the pandemic and just in general. Like, It's a different time. It's a different world. Just because I've been there doesn't mean that I can totally relate.
Well, yeah, and we had an amazing conversation with a PhD and Dr. Scott Shepard, and he talked about this. Like, just because you and I have gone, like, if I've had cancer and you've had cancer, doesn't mean I understand what you're going through, because we're two different people.
Right.
We're two entirely different people. And whether that's a difficult situation, such as an illness or a loss or grieving, it doesn't mean I have, like, it's what we need to learn to say is, I care how you feel.
Right.
And genuinely, like I want to understand, like, seeking to understand the person and sharing truthfully about our own, like, to make sure it's often called creating space for somebody, right? Where I too have been scared. Here's an example of me being fearful, scared, concerned, nervous. I don't know if that's how you're feeling right now, but I'm telling you right now, it's how I'm feeling. Right? I'm a little nervous. Like, I want you to tell a story. Will you grace me with showing a story? Is that you were brought into, you're speaking to a group, and I think it was for your book, one of your books, and you were the president of the company, was there. And you did something pretty nuts. Can you share that story? I'm paraphrasing it just to give you enough to click your mind. I don't want to steal the thunder from it, but it's such a powerful story. Hope I'm not positioning it wrong. But go ahead.
No. I think you're talking about the story with when I was in the meeting with my publisher.
Yes.
So my first book that I referenced, came out. So I got the book deal in 2006. I wrote it. It came out in 2007. It's called Focus on the Good Stuff. And the publisher for that book is called Josie Bass. They're actually an imprint or sort of a subsidiary of a larger publisher called Wiley that's out in New York. Josie Bass is here in San Francisco in the Bay Area where I live. And so after that book had been out for about 6 months, I was talking to my editor and he asked if I had an idea for a second book. And I said, well, I've been thinking about writing a book on authenticity. And he said, oh, that sounds interesting. We had a brief conversation. He called me back the next day and he said, Mike, I was talking to the team. There's some real interest in this book on authenticity. Why don't you come in next week and we can talk about it? And I said, cool. Okay. I was excited. I was a little nervous. I didn't know exactly what that meant. Like, we were just going to brainstorm. Was I supposed to sort of pitch the idea? I don't know. I called my agent. She couldn't fly in for it. She's like, just go to the meeting. It sounds like they want to just brainstorm. I was excited. I was a little nervous. I show up. I think the meeting's going to be with Alan, my editor, and a few of the folks on the team who'd worked on the first book. But I show up and we get into the conference room and Alan says to me, Mike, before we start the meeting, we're going to wait for a few minutes. And I said, okay, why? And he said, oh, well, Deborah's coming to the meeting. Now, Deborah's the president of Josie Bass at the time, who I'd never met. And then he said, yeah, and Deborah's boss from Wiley in New York, he flew out for the meeting. Which I was like, I think what I said was, oh, great. And that's not exactly what I was thinking. I mean, on the one hand, I'm like, wow, they're really interested. On the other hand, the little voice in my head is like screaming at me like, dude, you should have prepared more. You're going to blow this. Oh my gosh, what are you doing? You're not ready for this.
Yeah.
So now I'm like waiting and I'm kind of annoyed with Alan. Like, why didn't he tell me? And I'm annoyed with myself. Like, I should have asked more questions. But the whole time I'm like, we're making small talk and I'm like, great, it'll be great to meet them. So they show up in the room. And they're actually really nice, friendly. They're like, so sorry, we're late. We were in another meeting, nice to meet you, Mike. So we sit down. So Mike said, tell us about the book. So now I'm like supposed to do this pitch, which I'm sort of prepared for, sort of not really prepared for, definitely not prepared to do it for Deborah and her boss. And I start going into my little pitch. And sometimes when you start a meeting like that, you're nervous at first and then you get into it. And then usually it kind of, the nerves kind of calm down a little bit. Like, that wasn't happening. I wasn't getting less nervous. I was getting more nervous. And I'm pretty good at pretending like I'm not nervous when I really am. So they probably couldn't tell how awful I felt inside. And it wasn't like I was making a complete fool of myself, but I just felt terrible. Like I was having this sort of emotional wrestling match with myself. And in the middle of my, pitch, after a few minutes, I stopped and I looked at Deborah and I said, "Hey, Deborah, listen, it's really an honor to meet you. I know I mentioned that a few minutes ago when you came into the room." I said to her, "Boss, and you flew all the way out from New York for the meeting." I said, "But I noticed that I'm feeling really nervous and I'm trying hard to impress you." I said, "Can I stop doing that now and just be myself?" And literally, Kyle, as it came out of my mouth, like the voice in my head was screaming at me like, "Don't say that out loud. What is wrong with you?" Right? And it just kind of
You're reaching for the words. Did you reach forward and try to grab a hold of them?
Right. It like hung in the air. And I'm like, and in the middle of the awkward pause, I'm looking around the table and I can see the looks on people's faces. They're like, "Did he really just say that out loud? Like, I think you shared the inside part out loud. You're not supposed to do that." And then what was interesting after the awkward pause, because I didn't really know what else to say, I was waiting for some response, but there was a long pause and then Deborah laughed. And so did her boss. And so did everyone else around the table. So did I. And more than laugh, it was like I exhaled. And I said, "Listen, I mean, I was pitching a book on authenticity, right? I said, here's what I know about authenticity. I know that it's important. I know it's important to me. It's important to everybody I know in all my relationships." I mean, this was early 2008. So this is, 11 years ago, whatever that is, 13 years ago, if I can do the math in my head. I said, "I know it's important to," and I had my business at that time for probably about 7 going on 8 years. So all the teams and companies and leaders I work with, I know it's important. I said, "But I also know that it's hard. It's hard. It's one thing to say I want to be authentic, as you and I have been talking about, right, Kyle? It's a whole other thing to actually do it. It's scary." I said, "I want to write a book about that. Is there anything we can do to make it a little bit easier?" And in that moment, in that meeting, that important meeting where I was there pitching this book that I wanted them to publish, I actually stopped sort of pitching it and we just started talking about why is it hard for me? Why is it hard for them? Why is it hard in their industry, in their company? Why is it hard for me personally? And why do I see that and we just sort of had a discussion over the next like 45 minutes about what makes it hard. What can we do to make it a little bit easier? Why is it so important in our society at the time then? And, and something interesting, something really interesting though, I learned that particular day, Kyle, and then I've learned a ton since then. What ended up happening, the meeting ends, Alan's like, "Hey, thanks, Mike. We'll give you a call." Great. And I leave. And then I'm driving home from the meeting. And of course, I'm doing the thing we often do after the meeting. "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I said that. I should have said this. Why didn't I say that? What an idiot." All of that. I always say there's always 3 presentations we give, whether it's a meeting or a speech. There's the one we plan to give. There's the one we actually give. And then there's the one we wish we would have given when it's over. Right. And so I'm doing all that. And I didn't know, was Alan going to call me that day or that week, or what was I going to hear? And he called me at the end of the day. And I picked up my phone in my office and Alan was like, "Hey, Mike, I wanted to get back to you by the end of the day. Listen, first of all, I just got to tell you, that was one of the strangest pitch meetings I've ever been in." And Alan was like in his 70s at the time, getting ready to retire.
Thanks.
Yeah. He's like, it was strange. We all acknowledge that. But he said it was one of the most authentic conversations we've ever had in a room like that. And we really appreciated it. And we want to publish this book. And so the thing that I learned that day, Kyle, is that as important as it is for us in life to be prepared, and preparation is important, right? It's often more important to be present, to really show up in the moment in a real way. And then since that time, this was early 2008 when I got the yes for that book. I wrote that book. Ironically, it's called Be Yourself. Everyone else is already taken.
I love the title. I absolutely love the title.
Yeah, it's a great quote from Oscar Wilde.
Yes.
But that book came out in 2009, and I have been really studying and researching authenticity ever since then. And it's evolved over the years, and I've gotten to understand it more deeply. I think it's become both more challenging and more important than ever in this crazy, world we live in, where there's social media and podcasts and a million things happening all day, every day in different ways that we can sort of present ourselves to other people and to the world. But to me, it's the foundation of so many things, of trust, of great parenting, of great leadership, of great teams, of really being able to show up in the world the way we want to. And, the truth is, look, it's an in-the-moment experience. I can be an expert, whatever the heck that means, even on authenticity, and I can be full of it at any moment. I cannot show up authentically. Like, it's the moments in life that we really have a choice. It's a way of being. It's not like a thing as much. It's like, am I being real now? Am I being real now? Am I being real now?
I think one of the things that I think is also, and I this is my journey in this, and as I shared with you, I don't know what the opposite of authenticity and vulnerability is. Whatever that is, I'm recovering from that.
Yeah.
It's a willingness to explore this. And one of the things that I have learned in my journey, and I'm curious to see how this resonates with you, is that so often, me at 42, there's like Kyle Sanders at 42 is a combination of two things. The who I believe, I think the world wants me to be. So it's this internal, like, I'm supposed to dress this way, look this way, speak this way, say these words, not say these words, drive this kind of car, live in this kind of home. This whole list of things, these rules that I think the world has put upon me. And then there's this actual human being inside my soul that is that I was through whatever you believe our creator is and whatever you name that is, really not important for this podcast, but that I was actually those authentic gifts that I was given. Yeah. And that there's this journey that we go upon where we learn to detach from this exterior, this mask, if you will, this perception of who we are. And that the more we can get closer to understand who we are at our core, the more actually authentic we can be. Yeah. And that authenticity is to me, like I say, you cannot be in integrity unless you are an authenticity, that there's a correlation between those two things. And if you can't be authentic and you can't be in integrity with yourself, you can't be that way with anyone else either.
Yeah. Well, I think you're absolutely right. And look, I mean, I think a couple things though to remember for all of us is this is a journey and a process. And again, I don't say this to sort of blame anyone or anything, but the world in which we live, we get a lot of mixed messages growing up, depending on where we live and how we're raised. And I think most of the people around us, whether it's our parents or our teachers or, ministers or coaches, with good intention, they're trying to help us be successful and happy in the world. The truth is, again, we're all flawed human beings and we have sort of flawed thinking about a lot of things. And, one of the things I remember learning, so I grew up as an athlete, right? I was a baseball player all growing up, and that was my passion. That was what I loved to do.
You're a pretty darn good one, from what I understand.
I was good at it, right? I mean, I got drafted out of high school by the Yankees. I didn't sign with the Yankees because I got a chance to play baseball in college at Stanford. Then got drafted out of Stanford by the Kansas City Royals and did sign a contract with the Royals. Unfortunately, I got injured. I was a pitcher. I tore ligaments in my elbow when I was still in the minor leagues with Kansas City. So I got hurt at 23, finally retired at 25 after a series of surgeries, but started playing when I was 7. And so here's the one of the things that I learned along that whole journey. So the first thing that I learned was if you're good at something, especially something like a sport like baseball that people pay attention to, you can get a lot of attention. And as a kid, growing up, single mom, we didn't have a lot of money, some challenges going on in my life. It was nice to have something I was good at. It was nice to have something I got attention for. And not only did I get attention, and then, as an adolescent, it's like I get attention. People are paying attention to me. Girls are paying attention to me. This seems like a good thing. I'm sort of seen as, it's as a boy growing up, if you're an athlete, there's a certain amount of social status and credibility that comes with that. Now, there was a part of me, even as a kid, even as a teenager, I knew some of that was BS. I knew some of that wasn't fair because I wasn't any better or different than any other kid. I'm just trying to figure it out. I just happen to have a good left arm and I can throw a curveball and throw strikes and, whatever. It was just this thing. But then it's like, oh, maybe I can help me get into college, which it did. So now it becomes this thing where we get reinforced all the time, even with, and again, I think we've evolved a bit culturally to understand, but it's like, who's getting a lot of the attention? Oh, well, the kids that do well in school or that are good at sports or that look a certain way or that act a certain way. And again, it's not inherently evil, but there's a whole bunch of people that get left out of that process. And even when I got to college, Kyle, and I was a junior at Stanford, I got miserably, suicidally depressed. And mental illness runs in my family. My father had bipolar disorder, and there's a ton of really significant mental illness on my father's side of the family. So it wasn't that I was unaware of this as a thing. It wasn't like, what's that? I knew about it. In fact, was scared that somehow this might ultimately happen to me. And when I found myself so depressed, I was actually pissed off because I remember thinking to myself, wait a minute. I did everything I was supposed to do. I followed all the rules. Like even growing up, my dad left and my mom, we didn't have any money and there was all these challenges, but like I was good in school. I was good in sports. I got into Stanford. I mean, all the goals I had at 20 years old, almost 21 years old at that time, every goal that I'd had that I said, these are the goals, these are the things going to make me happy. How is it possible that I checked all those boxes and I'm still miserable? And I remember thinking to myself, this might sound weird and a little arrogant, but I'm like, up to that point in my life, I've done a pretty good job of playing this game of life. Like I'm winning it in the superficial way. And if I'm this miserable, other people must be as miserable, if not more. Like, and that was the moment for me. Like, why is no one talking? Now, I wasn't assuming every single kid on campus at Stanford and every other 20-year-old kid across the country was suicidally depressed like me. I knew that wasn't the case, but I'm like, I think there's a lot more going on down below the surface that people aren't talking about. And I was like, if I can get through this and not ultimately harm myself and can actually figure out how to live my life in a healthy, productive, happy way, I want to keep figuring out how to learn and heal and grow. And I also want to talk to other people about this because, you know, again, I think this is a really bad kept secret that people are suffering and struggling in life. Do you know?
Oh, and yes, I do.
And that's the thing. But even still, and even as a 21-year-old kid at Stanford walking around campus in the mid 90s, I'm in this beautiful place and I'm like, how come? And I know that there's a lot of depression and anxiety and eating disorders and other things going on. I know that just because I'm now into that world and tapped in, but no one's talking about it. No one's even asking anyone. I remember at the time, it used to drive me crazy that people would say, what are you up to? Or what are you doing? Or what are you doing this summer? Or what, you know, it was all about what you were doing, but nobody was even asking like, how are you? It's like, oh, I'm about to get this internship and I'm about to go to, you know, Europe for the summer. And everyone's like, that's awesome. Oh yeah, but I'm miserable and I hate my parents and I hate my life. Like no one was asking that question. And I'm like, this seems upside down to me. And again, that was many, many years ago, but I still have that passion. And we know, by the way, for whatever reason, and there's a bunch of reasons we could probably make, like kids today, whether it's college kids or high school kids or middle school kids, are like, you know, the incidence of depression, of anxiety, of eating disorders, of suicide, of all of these things are on the rise significantly. And it's not from a lack of awareness. It's just somehow a lack of depth and a lack of authenticity, I think, to be able to really address it because we're so focused. And even you and I, and even in the world that you operate in, the financial world, the podcasting world, the thought leadership world, the ultra training and athletic world, there's so much focus on outcome and result. And not that outcome and result aren't important, but we forget that there are human beings behind every success and failure. And I think that somehow gets lost in our obsession with the outcome.
So it's fascinating. I was having a conversation. I don't talk on this podcast a whole lot about my financial world, but there's a relevant connection here, and I'm going to share it. So I was talking to one of my really, really financially successful families today, and they're looking at a particular piece of property that's multi-million-dollar piece of property, and there's family considerations in this purchase. Lots of family considerations. Will some kids live there for periods of time? Will an elderly parent live there? There's a lot of exterior decisions, and this is a single woman who's making this choice. And I said to her, and this is probably going to be the last home purchase. This is going to be she's 60 years old, this last one. And I said to her, here's what I know about life. By being able to walk along people in all kinds of phases and stages and scenarios and situations, here's what I've observed. And this may not hold true to you, but it's hold true to many others. Is that the most authentic decision that we can make? Like when we think about life and we think about the end of the story, right? 80, 90, 95 years old, whatever this story, we don't get out of this thing alive, right? We know that to be true, right? And that the greatest gift we can give ourselves, one of the greatest gifts, is a life lived with limited regret. That we don't look back at this and go, man, like I should have done that differently. Like forget the speech, forget the presentation you're referencing others. Think about a whole life when you're at the end of it reflecting that way, right? That is not a good time, right? And so what I shared with her, I said, is if you can make a decision that will, in your opinion, will give you the most highest level of joy, that's authentic to yourselves, that is not contingent upon anybody else doing anything that you have zero control over, that's going to lead to the least amount of regret.
Absolutely. Well, and I think Kyle, it's such an important, and you probably see this in your work with people. And look, it's not, this is the paradox too. It's not that, generating wealth and saving money and building that wealth isn't important, isn't valuable for us as individuals, for our families, for our own legacy, for what can come from that. However, I look at this and struggle with this sometimes myself. I grew up, we didn't have any money, and it was a source of a lot of fear and a lot of stress. I shared in one of my books a story of, I was probably 6, 7 years old, and we had a bad rainstorm, and the ceiling started leaking in our living room. And my sister and I thought it was fun, and we were running, getting pots, and we're putting them on the floor, and it's leaking. And my single mother, who my dad had left and was struggling with his bipolar disorder and wasn't able to support us financially, my single mother, who was like, my mom's been gone for 10 years. My mom was tough as nails. My mom did not take any you-know-what from anyone. My mom fell on the floor in the living room, like crying hysterically as the water was dripping into our house. And I remember it because it scared me. I had never seen my mother that emotional, and my sister sort of ran to her, and I ran to her, and I didn't even know why she was crying or what was going on. I was so young. But I reflecting on it now, I could just imagine the fear and the pressure that she felt. She's trying to raise these 2 kids. The house is falling apart. She doesn't know what to do. She can't fix it. She doesn't have the money to fix it. And but that was a lot of how my childhood was, in a sense. And I made a commitment to myself. I don't want to live like that. If I can do it a different way, I don't want my kids to grow up in an environment like that. And I don't say this disrespectfully to my mother. It was like she did the best she could. And then there are times now in my life and over the last number of years where I have to make hard choices, like we all do, about, hey, this thing is really important to do. And and the work that I do, I'm passionate about. It's not like I do something that I do just to make money. And not that there's anything inherently wrong with that, but I love what I do. So, but this, as I see my girls, and they're, Samantha, our older daughter, is 3.5 years away from going off to college. And I swear to God, she was a baby in the sling like 3 weeks ago. That's how fast it is. So I think about these things a lot. And this show and what you talk about in terms of like our real legacy, and as you were sharing that story about your client, a story popped into my mind. I have a good friend from college who's been incredibly successful himself. And he married a woman that we went to school together. They got married right out of college. And her stepdad was Neil Armstrong. And when Neil died a few years ago, my buddy Brody called me the day that he died. And he was super emotional. And he told me what happened. And he said, we were in that room as he was dying. And here's this man who, he walked on the moon, right? He's like, Mike, he said to me, he's like, Mike, no matter how successful you and I ever hope to be in life, we're never going to do anything that great. People are going to remember this man 500 years from now.
Yes.
They're going to be talking about him and what he did. And he said, but the people in that room who were around that bed as he died, they weren't there because he walked on the moon. Nobody cared that he walked on the moon. What made him a great human being, yeah, he accomplished this really great thing that the whole world can acknowledge as an incredible feat. But the fact that he was an astronaut and he did this thing isn't why I'm sad right now. And it isn't why all the people who loved him are sad that he died.
Yes.
And there was something so poignant to me about this because, again, it's easy to get caught up in thinking that our legacy is about the things that we accomplish and the things that we produce.
Nothing to do with that. There's nothing to do with that. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, does that mean that it's not important to, run the ultra marathon or write the book or do the thing? No, those things are still important as long as I think we remember and have them in context to what really matters, who really matters. And I say this a lot of times when I'm talking to CEOs of companies, and even companies that are super mission driven and believe that their product or their service or what they're doing is going to disrupt and sort of change the way things, and they have a real high-minded mission and purpose. It's and we're also finite human beings that at some point we get to pass on this thing, whatever this thing is, to the next generation. I was recently listening to President Obama talk about the presidency just as a relay race, that you pass the baton on to the next. And when you take it even out of the context of politics and values and all the things you believe in, there's something when you really think. I've heard owners of sports franchises talking about holding on to these things. Yeah, they're incredibly wealthy and they're worth billions of dollars, but it's I'm holding on to this public trust of the the San Francisco 49ers or the Chicago Cubs or whatever it is that we want the team to be successful, but eventually we're going to pass this on to the next wealthy family that buys the team. And then, you know what I mean? And
I do.
I think those things are important to think about.
Well, and it's so why I say it doesn't matter. Why I say the book doesn't matter. Even though I want people to go out and buy your book. But
right.
Why I say that the ultra marathon doesn't matter. Why I say that Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama's presidency doesn't matter is because so often individuals pursue greatness for greatness alone.
Right.
That it's not an authentic representation of who they am and who they are, right?
Yeah.
Is that why did you this book that you created, we're all in this together, incredible book. We'll link to it in the show notes and the other books, the many that you've created, the 5 books. But you created this flew, tell me if I'm wrong. You didn't sit down and go, I'm going to write this book. This book came through you, by you, as an authentic representation of you. You didn't go to the library and read 3,000 books and go, okay, now I'm going to create my version of this book.
No,
is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's totally fair. You know what's funny? So, the thing about me and books, so I actually don't really like writing books. I do it. I know that might sound weird as someone who's written 5 books. I love talking to you right now. I love speaking when I get to go speak to my clients. I'm missing doing it in person these days. I think I've done 140 some odd virtual presentations.
Oh,
I'm grateful for Zoom and all the video platforms that we have that we can use these, but I love to talk and communicate and share ideas. That's my passion. I love having my own podcast or being on other people's podcasts. Writing is hard for me for a couple reasons. First of all, it's solitary, and sitting in a room by myself with my own thoughts can sometimes be dangerous, right? And I don't get the feedback of another human that's interacting with the ideas. So that it's just a challenging, and I was a kid, I learned how to read late. Writing was a bit of a struggle for me in school. I would always put off paper. So there's that part of it. But the other thing is that the actual process of writing a book is quite an endeavor, and I have to go away to do it, and it takes a toll on me and the family. At least it has. So I got done writing my 4th book, Bring Your Whole Self to Work, and it came out in the spring of 2018, and early May. And my wife and I go away the following month up to Calistoga, which is in Napa, about an hour from where we live, for our anniversary. The girls were at summer camp. We go. And that's where I go to write, actually. So I'm back in the place that I know. So it was weird to be there, Michelle. We love it. We're just hanging out. We're relaxing. And every time I close my eyes and every time I sit to write in my journal or to meditate, this idea just keeps getting downloaded onto me. And the voice is getting louder and louder. And it's you have to write another book. You have to write it right now. It's called We're All in This Together. And if you'd have seen me walking down the street in Calistoga, Kyle, you would have thought I was a crazy person, because I was literally leave me alone. Wherever that voice is coming from, leave me alone. Go find someone else. I'm not writing another book. I just finished one. It just came out. I'm done. I'm going to take a couple years before the next one. Michelle will kill me if I say I want to write another. This is not happening. And it would not leave me alone for and I sat down and wrote a few notes. I recorded something, and I just kept saying, let me just get this out of my head. Maybe it'll go away. It would not go away. And I was this book has to come out in 2020. It has to be called We're All in This Together. When I told Michelle and our girls, they were all no, please don't write another book. And I said, I know. But when I told my agent, and then she ended up pitching it to the publisher, they liked the idea, but they didn't like the title. They were we like the idea, but the title seems a little weird or a little soft or I don't know what that means exactly. And I'd never done this before, but I was adamant. I'm nope, I have to write this book, and it has to be called We're All in This Together. And part of, the book itself, as you know, because it's about teamwork, it's about culture, it's about how we create an authentic environment within our teams, our organizations, however big or small they are. But the subtext for me was always that coming into the year 2020, how incredibly divisive things had gotten politically and socially and just energetically. I was feeling it as I was traveling around the country. It felt like it got to a fever pitch. Of course, I had no idea it was going to come out in the midst of a global pandemic, in the midst of social and racial unrest that we've almost never seen before in our country. And it was I didn't write it with those things in mind, but I listened to that voice and to that calling and sat down and made sure to get it out and to put it out at that time. And it was, of all my 5 books, I've never had that experience where it was like it sort of pulled me to do it. I couldn't not do it. And I say that because to the point, and at the end of the day, like to your point, it doesn't really matter. Not that the book's not good and important. I think it is because I wrote it. However, it's so much about, I think, who we are and how we show up in the conversations that we want to have. And for me, I feel so blessed and so fortunate that over the past year, as hard as this year has been for me and so many people, and it's been really challenging, I've been able to be having conversations with people, with leaders, with teams about this notion that we're in this thing together. And that to me is like, oh, that's why I needed to write this book at this time, because I want to be having that conversation, especially right now.
Yeah, and I think, gosh, there's so much in that. There's so much in that. I think so often, one, I want to congratulate you. I think every person has had that feeling inside themselves, and they turn the voice down. They turn the volume down. They're afraid. Like so. Congratulations. Like, we all write books. Like, people write books. Not everybody like listens to their own advice. So first and foremost, thank you for modeling authenticity, courage, vulnerability. I had a question I want to ask you, but I'm scared to, because for your marriage is what's the unwritten book, my friend? What's, what do you see inside of yourself? What have you not created for the world yet? As you've been having these conversations, your work is incredible.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's interesting you asked that, because I don't feel compelled to write something, but I do feel like there's a handful of books. I mean, a couple of things I've learned about writing for me. And again, not everyone listening is a writer or wants to be a writer, but a lot of people aspire to and think, oh, I could never do that. Or I think a lot of us, and I put myself in this category, we're constantly writing books, whether we actually sit our butts down at the computer and type them out and someone actually publishes them and they get out into the world. That does take some work, and there's a lot to that process. But I think I'm in the process of writing multiple books right now and have been for years. There's definitely a book in me around grief. And I've experienced quite a bit of grief and loss in my life. The loss of my baseball career was pretty significant. The loss of each of my parents, the loss of my sister, and have had people close to me die. And as painful as it's been, Kyle, it's also been unbelievably life-altering for me, that I'm not scared to talk about death. I'm not scared to share about my own grief. Do I get scared sometimes thinking about my own death or the possibility of my wife or our girls dying? Of course I do. I'm human. Like, those terrify me more than anybody I could think of. And at the same time, it's like, this, when you sit down to plan someone's financial life, you have to think about the reality of, you're not going to be here at some point. We don't know if that's when you're 100 years old or if it's going to happen in a year, but we need to plan for various scenarios. And while that can be scary, I know when we sit down with our own financial advisor, I don't like thinking about that stuff, but you have to, as a mature adult, raising children and living in the world. But I think on a human level, on an emotional level, there's this notion that we have that we can't deal with that, or I don't even want to think about that. And I just, again, like so many things in life, I don't think that serves us. I don't think it serves us to run around paranoid about death 24/7. But a mentor of mine years ago said to me, Mike, if you lived your life more aware of your own death on a daily basis, you would live very differently.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think we either live in denial of it or we live in terror of it, neither of which serve us. And I also think when we are faced with situations where we lose, look, we've all been collectively grieving for the last year. And part of why this pandemic has been so hard is we don't know how to grieve. We don't, as a culture, we don't celebrate grief and loss. We don't acknowledge it. We don't invite it in. I mean, one of my favorite rituals is the Mexican tradition of the Day of the Dead.
Yes.
Dia de los Muertos, where you spend that time on November 1st honoring all the dead people, honoring all the people. Like, we don't do that in our culture. We do it right when someone dies. We have a few ceremonies we go through, and then the rest of the time is almost like no one wants to talk about it because it's sad or it's depressing. You and I were having a brief conversation about the late, great Wayne Dyer right before we hit record. And it's like, Wayne had a huge impact on my life and on my work, as he did on so many other millions of people around the world. And it's like, I got to know Wayne personally. We weren't like super close friends by any stretch, but I want to be able to talk about him as well as my father or my mother or my sister. I make it a point on the anniversaries of my parents' deaths and my sisters, as well as on their birthdays. I always post about them on social media. And I do it for a couple reasons. I do it because it's cathartic for me. I do it because the people who knew them or were connected with them, it feels good to me. Oh, I miss your dad, or I miss your mom, or I miss your sister, or I was just thinking about Lori the other day, or whatever. That actually feels good, and it makes them more real for me and alive. And I also do it as a way to model, like, not everybody has to do that. You don't have to be public with it, but we don't have to stop talking about people because they die. We don't have to pretend like we're fine, whether it's been 6 months or 6 years or 20 years. Like, it's the journey of being human.
It's never
and
okay.
Death is one of the most universal and natural things we experience as human beings, and we never want to talk about it.
So I want to be respectful of your time here, but I've got to. So write the book. So my grandfather, when I was 3 years old, was murdered, and we don't talk about it. My family never talks about it. Like, almost never talks about it.
Right.
Like, and they didn't put the people in prison. They didn't. The trial didn't happen until I was in 5th grade. So I sat through the trials of my for one of the people who, right. Yeah. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about it at all. And I'm not saying we should sit down and like get together once a year and like rehash what we went through.
Right.
But it was a traumatically painful thing for all of us that were involved in that process, right? And that's a pretty severe way to lose someone. But losing somebody, no matter how you lose somebody, if you love them and you lose them, you will miss them. It is just that simple, right?
Absolutely.
And it doesn't go away. It's not like, well, gosh, it's been 10 years. You really didn't matter, right?
No.
And
I'm so sorry to hear that happened. I can only imagine the impact on your grandmother and your parents and your family and you as a little kid, and that being such a trauma in addition to the loss. Like, if your grandpa died anyway, he died.
Right.
That's sad because your grandpa dies, but to die by someone killing him, it's different but similar when I hear stories about suicide. It's like there's so much pain and trauma around the way the death happened.
Yes.
So we don't even give ourselves full permission to grieve the loss. And then the way the loss happened is so tragic and painful. It just, like, we can't even deal with it.
Can't deal with it.
Which I understand and have empathy for, and can only imagine. We have a friend who recently lost her 16-year-old son in accidental overdose. So painful, so awful, so scary and tragic. And she's a public person. Her name's Laura Berman. She's had a radio show for years, and she's been very public with her grief and very public with her story about her son Sammy's death. And in some ways, it's uncomfortable and hard, especially as parents, to like, and as a friend, just the rawness of it. But I'm so grateful and appreciative to her for her courage, because she's going through her own journey of grief and healing, but also talking about this, trying to warn other parents how this could happen so that she can potentially save other children and teenagers and families from going through this.
Yes.
But there's also a part of me, and I've said to Michelle, and I say this with love and with respect to Laura, like, sometimes it's hard for me to read or to listen to her share about it because it's so intense. And I think about, it's so close to home with our girls being around the same age. And so again, I just think if we could just have a more real conversation about it, even if, just imagine with your family or anyone, hey, you know what? We don't like to talk about that because it's so darn painful. But even that, to me, is healthier and better for everybody than just not talking about it.
Well, and there's a gift in it, right? So that's chapter 1 of the story. Chapter 2 is, what if I told you I've forgiven the people that killed my grandfather?
Oh,
right. Which I have.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Because in absence of doing that, I wouldn't be the person I'm sitting in front of you today as. And I've gotten into this conversation with some folks on this podcast around the power of forgiveness, which is my book that has not been written, that is in my head. It'll come out someday. But
you're writing it right now.
Oh, I have been for years. And the truth is, right? The truth is for all of us, right? Is that these painful conversations, these hard conversations, these difficult conversations, there's the gift in it, right? It's the true gift in it. If I never shared with somebody that was an experience and part of my journey, then I also don't get to share with them the gift and power of forgiveness that can unfold in a deep and meaningful way. And I'm not looking for attention for it. I'm not
Right.
looking to, I will never, ever, ever condone, nor do I like any of these true crime podcasts. I think they're garbage. I'm sorry. I mean, if that's your thing, it's just not my thing for
Right.
obvious, pretty personal reasons. But,
Sure.
the piece on all of this is that when we have these open, hard, difficult, and meaningful dialogues, it's really this. We're all in this together, that you and I are so alike, and that that we have more in common than what is seen at the surface. And when we're willing to share these hard things that we've experienced in our lives, the humanity that binds us all together, then I can see you. And it's so hard. Like, I see you beyond who you voted for last time. I see you beyond these superficial things. And I see you as a human that suffers and struggles and has moments of despair and concern. I see you as a human being. And when I see you as that, I see myself in your eyes. I see myself in your story. I see myself in your life. And it's hard not to love you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think, down below the surface of the waterline, as I like to say on the iceberg. I love
that analogy. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, we get to some pretty basic human emotions. And I think we can acknowledge that maybe we have different values or different religions or different political views or different backgrounds or different races or different ages and gender. All those things can be true and real and important and relevant. And then the further down below that waterline we go, and that comes back to, the experience of loss, the experience of grief, whether it's the death of a loved one or the loss of a dream or just the experience of anything like that. It does bind us as human beings. And as our friend Brene Brown likes to remind us, and I've learned from her work, we can't selectively mute emotions. Mm-hmm. So if I say I'm not going to feel sadness or anger or regret or disappointment or rage even, then that doesn't allow us to feel joy and gratitude and love as intensely. And to your point, I can't imagine what it's like to go through that experience that you and your family have gone through with your grandfather being murdered. Although hearing you talk about it and imagining that, then the even deeper, more challenging work, in addition to the grief and the loss and the trauma, is, can I forgive? Because ultimately, as you know and have experienced, which I can just feel in you talking about it, the forgiveness isn't for the people who did that horrible thing. The forgiveness is to free yourself, right, of the bitterness and 100%. The rage. But by doing that, that doesn't, again, it's not sort of the spiritual bypass, as we call it. Like, we have to go through that dark place. We have to go through those real emotions. We have to go through that anger and rage and disappointment and sadness and all of that so that we can get to an authentic place of forgiveness. Because I call
it the suck. I call it going through the suck. It sucks. Yeah, it sucks. People think it's going to be easy. It's not. It's not. Right?
No, not at all. And that's the thing. It's like when we get our hearts broken, and I think getting your heart broken is one of the hardest and most painful but most important experiences to have as a human being. And if you allow yourself to really be heartbroken and feel that and move through it, you can get to a place of forgiveness. You can get to a place where you come out the other side stronger, more ready to fall in love again or to create the next dream or whatever. But there's no recipe for it. There's no timetable for it necessarily. We all have our own journey and our own process. And that's what I find, even circling back to the thing about grief, when I do share about my own grief stories, and I'm grateful for all the support, all the counseling, all the therapy, all the work that I've done over the years to heal through those, because I can tell, and I don't say this from a holier than thou place or from a superior place, but when I can talk to people or share about grief, and I can see how raw a lot of people's grief still is, even for losses that happened many, many years ago, simply because we collectively don't do a great job of supporting ourselves and each other to go through that suck that you talk about and really allow ourselves to grieve so that we can, in a healthy way, come out the other side. And then we just accumulate these losses and these griefs throughout our lives, and we're sort of carrying them around with us, unnecessarily.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love it. Mike, you're one of the people if I had a Joe Rogan 3-hour format, what a gift this connection has been. So first, let me just thank you so much for what you're putting out in the world today. It is beautiful. It is necessary. And from a guy who is learning to be okay and grappling with the comfortability of vulnerability, I thank you so much for handing that permission slip out to many, many men and encouraging us to show up in our places of work, our places of worship, and most importantly, in our homes, and allowing ourselves to be seen, and hopefully turning the page, even if it's just a little bit, for future men to know that it's okay to say, and women, but for individuals in workplaces and around to say, I'm going to be me and I'm going to be seen, and that's an okay thing.
Yeah.
So Mike, I've got one more question for you, but before we get to that, how can we support you? I know the name of the new book is We're All in This Together, Creating a Team Culture of High Performance, Trust, and Belonging. Such powerful words in that. I'm assuming this is on Amazon and all the places, all the retailers we traditionally find books. How else can people connect with you? Where can we find you on social media? I know you've got a number of other books. What's the best way to connect it to you, Mike?
The best place is our website, which is mike-robbins.com. You can connect to me on all the social platforms there and check out our podcast and other things. So mike-robbins.com is the best one.
Wonderful. We'll link to all that in the show notes. Mike, I want to thank you so much for what you've created. I've got one last question for you before we let you go to your day. What does legacy on purpose mean to you?
I think legacy on purpose means, keeping things in perspective and focusing on how we make people feel and how we show up on a daily basis. It's being less concerned with the outcome and the circumstances and more concerned with the people and how people feel. There was a quote from Randy Pausch's book, The Last Lecture, and he talks about people are more important than things. And I try to say that to myself as often as I can so that I remember that people are more important than things.
I love that. Well, thank you for being one of the greatest gifts I'll get to unwrap today. Certainly better than anything I could have received, which is this beautiful conversation. So, Mike, thank you for your legacy in my life today and to all of our audience. Wish you all the success, my friend, and I certainly hope we can stay in contact after this connection.
Thanks.